Hey folks, Patrick from the past here. What follows is an unscripted, somewhat meandering, free-form conversation with myself on Snapchat about the word weird, specifically as it's been applied to JD Vance and others in recent months. Trigger warning for inconsistent audio, bad lighting, dropped conversational threads, unaddressed points, and JD Vance. I want to talk and therefore think a little bit today about language, political propaganda, and my boy JD Vance. Hashtag not my boy. And doesn't it say something that immediately right off the bat, I felt a legitimate need to disclaim that joke that JD Vance was my boy, because that's how sort of polarized and pre-charged we are these days, that if 10 seconds into a much longer and more thoughtful take, at the end of that introduction, someone watching this really did think that I was about to come out in support of JD Vance, or that I might even believe that in the back of my mind, that JD Vance is like an okay guy or like a good leader, that would just be immediate disqualification of anything I'm about to say, which is tough because it makes it really difficult to think more deeply about these sociopolitically charged things, because what people are immediately looking for at the outset is just that you already agree with them and have decided what is sort of morally correct and therefore discursively acceptable. I'm actually not really that interested one way or the other in JD Vance. What I'm interested in talking about and thinking about today is calling JD Vance weird. Why are we doing that? What do we mean by it? What might be both the intentionality behind it, but also the unintended consequences of it? And are we okay with that? Jump cut. So now, if you're interested, sick. Now, if you're interested, we'll spend the next part of our lovely August afternoon walking around Patrick's house and thinking about the word weird and what it means. So item one that we need to agree upon is just that people are calling JD Vance weird deliberately, right? Okay, that's item one. Right? Item two that we need to agree upon is that the word weird, right, and we're not going to presume a particular reason yet, but the word weird has been chosen intentionally and repeatedly over similar synonyms that we could maybe suggest in different contexts, right? So premise two that we need to agree upon is that JD Vance is being called specifically weird, not odd, not strange, not bizarre, all right? And we'll come back to all those different words, all right? So premise one, right? People are deliberately calling JD Vance weird. Right? Premise two, right? They are specifically choosing the word weird from among other possible words as their epithetical label, right? So if we disagree about that, I would love to hear below in the comments your takes as to what I've gotten wrong. But if we're all on board with agreeing with those two things, let's move forward and ask some questions as to why this is happening and what the effects are. Jump cut. So I want us to start by thinking about the word weird in a couple of different ways, right? We're going to explore its personal connotations to each of us, and then I'm going to talk briefly about some of its historical denotations, which is to say, the first thing we're going to do is think about what the word means when we hear it or use it. What does it make us think about? What do we feel about it? All that personal, subjective, but sort of primary stuff. All right? And then secondarily, we're going to look at specific ways in which that word has been used historically, sort of whence it comes, and what meanings have been sort of gathered by and attached to it over time. So first, let's start by imagining that we are sitting amongst a group of friends, okay, people we know well. We're in a comfortable, normal, sort of casual conversational environment, right? And someone describing to us a person we have not met, right, says that they're weird. What would you assume or begin to assume about that person? What follow-up questions might you ask? If you had a friend who said they met someone new, yeah, there's this new guy coming out with us tonight, kind of weird. What do you assume? All right? And now flip that around, right? And if you are someone who uses the word weird, right? When might you use it? Why would you use that word to describe someone, right? And here, don't think about J.D. Vance or some political figure you don't know. Think about someone that you might actually have an interaction with. What behaviors, right? What mannerisms, what attitudes, what things would make someone weird to you? And once you've done that both ways for the word weird, I think you should repeat the exercise, but substitute in the following words: strange, odd, and bizarre. Right? So repeat that same exercise with those 4 words, right? And consider the differences. Jump cut. So it's important to clarify right here that we are talking about personal connotation and individual, in this case, like private usage, right? What you're thinking inside your own mind when you hear or deploy a word, right? So this will inherently be and forever be subjective. However, that being said, right, the sort of collective understanding of words, the social communal understanding of words, is itself a product, right, of the individual meanings of that word that are held by the community, right? So if let's construct a hypothetical world in which I live with 9 other people, right? We all share the same language, and in that language there is a word that is justice, right? On one level, there will be 10 individual meanings of justice, and on the other hand, there will be this amorphous shifting, right, sort of collective definition of justice that we actually see out in the real world, right? You can immediately perhaps see from this example that what also will happen in societies, and inevitably happens, right, is that we get private sort of language groups, right? Maybe 3 people in that community of 10 will come to an agreement about what justice means. That's pretty consolidated and pretty similar to their individual ideas. But that collective definition might be completely different from the collective definition held by the 7 other people who have similarly aligned definitions, right? So there's no perfect science, right, in analyzing word meanings or intentions, right? But I'm going to talk to you now a little bit about how I would use the words weird, strange, odd, and bizarre differently, and the things that I assume, or rather sort of feel, when those words are used in discussions I'm a part of, or even in labeling me. Jump cut. In most day-to-day cases in which I encounter it, the word odd is typically being used as a synonym for the word peculiar, right? Something that's odd is not even. It's not exactly in the order that we'd expect it. It's out of the ordinary. It's non-normative, right? Something that is strange is pretty similar to something that's odd, but there's usually a little bit more of a foreignness to it, if that makes sense, right? Something that's strange is a little bit more other than something that is odd. At least that's my sort of general sense in, 39 years of encountering these words. The word bizarre and the word weird, though, are both, I think, much more interesting and much more, we might say, problematically saturated than the words odd and strange, especially if we consider sort of the historical origins and usage. So let's start with the word bizarre, actually. In a way, it's somewhat weird that the word bizarre hasn't been canceled, because it has such a clear derivation from a sort of Orientalist outlook, right? The word bizarre as an adjective comes from the noun bizarre, which is, a marketplace, one that we would probably expect to find in a Aladdin-esque setting, sort of Near East probably, right? The west side of Asia, so to speak, Middle East, maybe into India. Things from there are bizarre because they're crazy, right? But in a strange way, in a weird way, in an odd way, a sort of crazy that is interestingly both sort of an otherization, but also a celebration. Right? We can look at a similar example maybe in the idea of an Oriental rug, okay? And this idea of the Orient in general as being that which is both alluringly exotic, but also kind of otherized and as a result sort of dehumanized. The word weird, on the other hand, at least from my perspective, is much more negatively saturated historically. Weird is something that we would have called a witch right before we burned or hanged her, right? It is a word that is connected to sort of non-Christian, both culture and religion, particularly in sort of like the northern UK. I don't know actually etymologically if weird is an Anglo-Saxon word or a Celtic word, but it certainly is of sort of that more Proto-Germanic range of origin, right? As opposed to a word like strange or even bizarre, which are coming to us through French. So weird is something that if you were labeled for a large period of sort of the English-speaking history, weird is a label that if applied to you would have some pretty serious negative, honestly like dangerous and maybe at a certain point fatal sort of social implications, right? If you're in a Puritan society, or really honestly any sort of strongly Christian society from say, I don't know, the year 600 to the year 1995, right? Basically for the last like 1500 years, being labeled as weird is a pretty dangerous label to have put upon you. It's not great. The short upshot of it would be to say that weird has a sort of long history of being used as a label specifically applied to socially marginalize, ostracize, demonize, right? It's honestly sort of just this side of evil. And now if we look back at when this word started being applied, okay, to J.D. Vance and other sort of opponents, nemesis of the Democratic Party and the connected, socio-political apparatus, we can see this shift towards the word weird come just in the wake of the attempted murder of Donald Trump. A time when there was a pretty loud but brief push for a de-escalation of political rhetoric. If we can't call them evil or sort of existential threats to our lives anymore because there's a worry that that might cause people to, take a gun and try and shoot the evil guy, we can pivot to calling them weird, right? Because it is at once both obviously sort of less charged and less condemnatory, and also sort of more amorphous and hard to pin down, right? I can suggest that the word weird is a dog whistle for certain things, and I will in just a moment, but it can't really be proved, right? It's kind of like an okay thing to slur someone with. Jump cuts. And is it even a slur, Patrick? Isn't that a little hyperbolic to say that weird is a slur? It's a word we use every day to describe all sorts of things. And I would say, sure, other Patrick, you're right. But there is a spectrum of usage. And I think if we take two examples involving hashtag not our boy J.D. Vance, right, we can see maybe the slightly insidious nature of this term. Because I'm going to suggest to you that the word weird, right, has some, at least for this man, right, has some problematic sort of sexual undertones, unnatural undertones that go back to its origins, but connect through our discourse and storytelling around serial killers, around sort of like horror film subjects in general, and also apply, interestingly, to one specific case I'll give here in a second. Jump cut! You see, when we say that the way J.D. Vance orders donuts is weird, we probably are just kind of saying that it's a little peculiar. It's a little strange. It's a little odd. It's quirky and unnatural. He is struggling to have a normal interaction with other human beings. It's a little weird, right? But when we say that J.D. Vance or the Republican Party's desire to control the reproductive systems of women is weird. Suddenly we're seeing a little deeper into that word and its meanings, because now it's sort of signifier of the unnatural. It's signifier of the sexually perverse. This is coming a little more to the forefront. And if we circle back to my original sort of thought experiment, imagine somebody you know describing a new person that you haven't met as weird. You know, what kind of things are you thinking? Well, honestly, for me, I would go immediately to a close synonym that we haven't discussed yet, which is creepy, right? If someone to me, especially if it were a woman, described a man as weird, I'm picking up some, intentional or otherwise, connotations or communications of a deeper, sort of more primal and more urgent discomfort with that person. An uncertainty as to whether or not they are a safe person, they are a natural person, they are a person who isn't going to try and make me have a baby I don't want to have, right? Like, so on the one end of the spectrum of the use of weird, there is this deeper, harsher, stronger critique, right? A sort of moralistic and sort of threat-based assessment. And then other times we're just saying that dude doesn't know how to order donuts. Jump cut. So what we end up with is I would argue, sort of deliberately engineered discursive situation in which a word's more insidious, right, more strongly negative connotations, insinuations, and even denotations are being dragged across the spectrum and applied wholesale to even the most minute actions by this particular person. Hashtag not my boy, JD Vance, right? We can see similar things probably happen with words like fascist, right? A word like evil, okay? These words that we can maybe accurately apply in the most extreme of circumstances. But then once that epithet, once that slur becomes sort of an acceptable and standardized label for that person that we are labeling, we can transfer it across the whole breadth of their actions, even to those which are just like maybe not worthy of being critiqued. I don't know. I've probably ordered donuts in a weird way before too. I don't know. So those are my thoughts, guys, on the word weird and on JD Vance. And it's interesting. It's just interesting to me. I don't mind on the one hand, right? I just think it's kind of fascinating as part of our political discourse. But I think the reason that it has kind of stuck in my brain and stuck in my craw is because, you know, as a man who at various times throughout my life have been sort of demonized, labeled, marginalized a bit with like words, terms, and judgments about my supposed weirdness, strangeness, queerness. There's one, right? There's an interesting one, because that's a word we're pretty defensive about, protecting the weirdness of those who self-identify as queer, right? And I might even from time to time be one of those people. So that's a label that we wouldn't mindlessly apply to someone, right? And yet we're pretty thoughtless with this word weird, right? And the implications that it can have. If you get labeled as weird behind your back by your friend group, that's pretty gross, right? Like, what's weird about me? Why don't you delineate and sort of explain the strangeness that it is you're describing, right? Do I think that it's weird that some men have a fixation on the hypothetical children inside of hypothetical women? Do I think it's a little strange, a little creepy, a little gross that people seem obsessed with controlling other folks' reproductive systems from top to bottom? Yeah, I do think that's weird. I think the word weird has a real strong purpose there. I think it's a little weird, a little strange, and sometimes a little bit gross, though, when we take really strong epithets and really strong labels and just sort of thoughtlessly perpetuate them across the spectrum. You know, I don't think the sort of oversaturation of the words evil, weird, fascist, right, in our discourse, to the point where they almost lose all definitive meaning, I don't think that's great either. So I think if we have a problem with something JD Vance is saying or doing, we would probably help everyone, ourselves included, by being a little bit more specific about just what that weirdness is that we're pointing out. That's it. Check the hat. Jump cut. Oh, hey. Congratulations. You made it to the end. If you enjoyed this video, if it made you feel anything, if you have takes, if you know me and just want to say, hey, hello, how's it going, Patrick? You better be voting for Kamala. Feel free to drop me a line. Maybe I'll make more of these. I hope I do. I think having to sort of, at least to some degree, straighten out and fully express my many trains of thought, having to sort of organize them in some way, even in an unscripted sort of free-flowing approach. I think that's good for me. I think that's probably good for everyone to have practice with that. So this video and any other videos that show up like it are much less about me trying to convince you of something, encourage you to believe something, change your mind about something, and much more about me just trying to be sort of an open source cognitive model, both for other people and for my many selves in the future. So, ciao for now.